The first light of dawn crept over the valley in thin, pale streaks, brushing frost against the worn boards of the barn and the bent metal of the fence posts. The air carried a brittle edge, each breath sharp against the lungs, and the scent of wet earth mingled with the lingering sweetness of hay, pressed damp from the night. Eli crouched beside a trough, his hands cupped around a trickle of water that seemed colder than the winter itself. He let it drip slowly, watching each drop fracture in the early light, and for a moment the world felt suspended, fragile, and indifferent. The valley had been empty long before Eli arrived, its once golden fields now a muted brown, the grass pressed low by frost and neglect. He ran a hand along the edge of the trough, feeling the coarse grain of the wood beneath his fingers, splintered and weathered. His boots were cracked at the heels, soles thinning with every step across the frozen soil. In the stillness, he could hear the distant hollow thud of hooves, though no horse was in sight, only the memory of what had once roamed freely here and what had been lost. Inside the barn, tools leaned against the wall like forgotten sentinels. Rusted pitchforks, a coil of frayed rope, and an empty feed bucket bore silent witness to years of gradual surrender. Letters with curled edges, bills and notices he had not the heart to open, lay scattered across a small table in the corner. Each one a reminder of debts he could not pay, promises he could not keep. The clock on the wall ticked in slow, deliberate intervals, echoing the rhythm of a life that had narrowed into routine and quiet disappointment. He straightened, shoulders stiff from the cold, and stepped toward the door, letting the creak of the hinge announce his movement. The valley outside stretched pale and empty, the low hills dusted with frost and shadowed by the waning night. A thin wind brushed across his face, carrying the faint odor of wood smoke and damp soil, and he shivered. It was the kind of morning that reminded a man of everything he had lost. Family long gone, a small fortune squandered in moments of pride, a life that had once promised more than this cold, silent solitude. And then, in the corner of his vision, a movement, a shape, dark against the frost-stiffened grass, shifted hesitantly. A horse, not a proud stallion or a polished mare, but a wild, crooked figure with a tangled mane and flanks scarred from some unspoken injury. Its eyes were wary, sharp with fear and intelligence, reflecting a life of neglect and suffering that mirrored Eli's own in ways that made his chest tighten. The creature froze, every muscle tense, as though waiting to decide whether he was friend or threat. For 3 long seconds, they simply regarded one another. Time stretched thin, each second measured in the shallow rise and fall of breath, the soft scrape of frost beneath hoof, the quiet thrum of a heart that had not yet surrendered. In that suspended moment, Eli felt a jolt of recognition, a silent acknowledgement that the world could still shift if one had the courage to reach across the space between despair and hope. The horse did not move, but it did not flee, and that hesitation, that small act of stillness, was enough to ignite something in him, a spark he had long thought extinguished. He lowered his hand slowly, keeping his fingers loose, open, visible. He breathed with the rhythm of patience, not command. Each inhale brought the scent of the valley, the damp earth, the faint sweetness of frozen hay, the bitter tang of frost, and with each exhale, a reminder of his own fragility. His life had been a series of half measures and quiet failures. The barn, the tools, the empty trough were only the visible fragments of a man who had lost his way. Yet here, in the early light, there was a chance, however small, to do something right. The wind rose slightly, and with it, the horse shifted again, a cautious step forward that bent the world toward possibility. Its coat was matted and dull, a testament to days spent without care. Yet there was a spark in its eye, a flicker of the creature it had once been, and perhaps still could become. Eli studied the scars along its flank, each one a silent testimony to cruelty or misfortune. He thought of the letters on his table, the unpaid debts, the years of quiet self-reproach, and felt a curious kinship with the creature. Both of them were marred, both of them hesitant to trust, both of them waiting for a moment that might never come. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled a handful of oats, letting them spill gently onto the frost-hardened ground. The horse's ears twitched, nostrils flaring, but it did not bolt. The gesture, small and deliberate, was enough to pierce the boundary of fear. In the valley's pale light, Eli could see the tension in its shoulders ease fractionally, the slightest tilt of its head as if to acknowledge the offering. And for the first time in years, he felt a surge of purpose that was not measured by debts or losses or the quiet ache of loneliness. Yet the valley remained patient, indifferent. There were no fanfares, no sudden miracles, only frost, wind, and the slow, deliberate movement of life pressing against neglect. Eli knew that trust would take more than a single morning, that healing required persistence beyond impulse. He also knew that this horse, with its scars and wariness, was an echo of something in himself he had long refused to confront: the quiet need to care, to risk, to rebuild. The choice lay bare before him, as stark as the frost-streaked grass: retreat to the safety of indifference, or step fully into the unknown, guided only by the fragile hope that kindness might leave a mark. The horse shifted again, slightly closer, and Eli stood, letting the cold seep through his coat, feeling the muscles in his back ache from years of labor and defeat. The valley was still silent, yet in that silence, there was a thread of tension, a promise that life could pivot in unexpected ways. He drew a slow breath, letting it out with the quiet resolve of a man who had nothing to lose but despair. As he took that first deliberate step toward the creature, the barn behind him caught the pale light, its broken boards no longer just symbols of failure, but of continuity, of persistence, of history not yet abandoned. He could not know what would come of this morning, this simple act of attention and patience, but the stillness of those 3 seconds, the moment suspended between fear and trust, had already begun to change something within him. The valley held its breath with him, waiting for the next movement, the next choice, the first gesture of courage that might turn struggle into redemption. In the distance, a crow took flight, its wings cutting the morning air. Frost glistened on the tips of grass, catching the light like scattered gold. The valley felt wide, empty, yet pregnant with possibility. And in that fragile, waiting quiet, Eli and the horse held their gaze, neither one retreating, both poised on the edge of something that could not yet be named. A story had begun, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet determination to reach across fear, to see the world, and be seen in return. The morning wind rose again, carrying with it the faint scent of wet hay and earth, and Eli, heart-taut with both fear and hope, stepped fully forward, reaching not just for the horse, but for the fragile promise of a life rebuilt from the ruins of what had been lost. The horse shifted its weight, hooves pressing into the frost-crusted soil, ears flicking with alert precision. Eli held his hand steady, letting the silence stretch, letting the morning wind carry his calm into the space between them. Each inhalation filled his lungs with the sharp scent of frozen earth, of wet hay, of distant pines still heavy with night frost. He could feel the tension in his own shoulders, the familiar ache of muscles unused to gentle patience, and he knew that any sudden motion would send the creature fleeing into the hills. He knelt again, letting his eyes fall to the snow-flecked grass between them, and let the oats spill slowly from his palm. Each grain landed like a small promise, a quiet offering in a world that had long demanded nothing of him. The horse's nostrils flared, steam rising in delicate threads, but it did not retreat. Its eyes, dark and wary, tracked his movements with an intelligence that felt almost human, an awareness honed by days of neglect and the instinctive wariness of survival. Eli spoke softly, his voice low and even, as though the sound of his own breath might build a bridge between fear and trust. "Easy now," he murmured. The words were not a command, only a suggestion, a whisper carried on the frost-bitten air. He noticed the way the horse's muscles rippled beneath its matted coat, taut and coiled like wire. There were scars along its flank, pale and jagged, marks of injuries old enough to have faded, yet still visible, a record of hardship endured. Each one seemed to whisper the same question Eli felt in his chest. Could a life broken be made whole again, with nothing but patience and care? He stepped slightly closer, slow enough that the horse could see the motion as deliberate and not threatening. His boots crunched on the frost-hardened ground, each sound sharp against the valley's quiet. The horse's ears twitched, a subtle measure of calculation and fear, but did not bolt. Its tail lifted in a tentative flick, a small acknowledgement of his presence. Eli crouched lower, letting his eyes meet the animal's, searching for any sign of recognition, any flicker of willingness to bridge the gap between them. Minutes passed with no rush, only the small sounds of frost breaking beneath hooves, the distant caw of a crow, the faint rustle of wind through dried grass. Eli reached out his hand, closer now, fingertips brushing the first strands of matted mane. The horse flinched at the contact, but did not pull away. Its breath came in short, trembling puffs, the steam curling around its muzzle. Eli mirrored the rhythm, matching his breath to the cadence of the creature's, letting the shared presence become the foundation of trust. He spoke again, a softer murmur, almost a meditation. "We're not so different, you and I." The words hovered in the thin morning light, carrying a truth he had only recently admitted to himself. Both of them had known fear, neglect, isolation. Both had scars that were unseen or ignored, and both had survived through endurance, though survival had not always brought joy. The horse shifted slightly, allowing his hand to rest along the curve of its neck, the first act of connection that demanded no resistance. Eli's mind traced the outline of what had brought him here: the valley, the abandoned barn, the years of quiet surrender. Each detail of his own life mirrored the creature's condition: broken, wary, waiting. And yet, in this moment, there was a possibility that neither of them had anticipated, that the smallest acts of patience and attentiveness could tilt the world in favor of hope. He offered more oats, scattering them in a wider circle, letting the animal choose the proximity, letting the choice belong to the horse entirely. The creature sniffed cautiously, one nostril brushing the grains, before taking a tentative step forward. Its hooves pressed softly into the frost, crunching lightly, and Eli allowed himself a quiet exhalation. The horse's dark eyes held a flicker of curiosity now, a trace of interest beyond instinctual caution. He could feel the tension in the valley shift, as if the land itself acknowledged the small victory. The barn, silent witness to years of neglect, seemed to lean into the light, its broken boards now symbols not of failure, but of continuity and endurance. As the horse moved closer, Eli took in every detail: the thin sway of its ribs, the scars along its flank, the way its mane clung in damp, twisted strands. Each mark told a story, each twitch of muscle reflected caution learned from hard experience. He allowed himself to imagine what those experiences must have been: the harsh hands of neglect, the sudden fear of abandonment, the loneliness of a life spent running yet never free. And in imagining, he felt a resonance he could not deny. He too had lived among shadows, flinched at misfortune, carried wounds unseen by the world. A soft whinny broke the quiet, low and hesitant, as if the horse had tested its voice and found it could still speak, still reach for acknowledgement. Eli responded with a slow, deliberate nod, letting the gesture convey agreement, recognition, empathy. He extended his hand fully now, resting it along the animal's shoulder, and felt the taut strength beneath the matted fur. The warmth of life beneath the chill of the morning struck him, a reminder that trust and connection existed even in the harshest of seasons. The horse did not run. It did not shy. It stayed, letting him touch, letting him breathe, letting the moment become a silent negotiation of patience and respect. Eli's heart, long accustomed to the quiet ache of solitude, beat with something closer to anticipation. He understood, without words, that the bond forming here would require persistence, vigilance, and humility. There would be setbacks, fear would return, and both of them would have to confront the ghosts of their past. But the choice to begin, just to begin, had been made. He stepped back slightly, giving the horse space, letting it decide its own motion. The creature flicked its ears, sniffed at the scattered oats, and in that pause, Eli saw a flicker of acknowledgement, a quiet nod to the trust building between them. It was tentative, fragile, but unmistakable. And in that acknowledgement, he felt the first true spark of purpose in years, a reminder that the act of caring, however small, could alter the course of lives scarred by neglect. The valley seemed to hold its breath, the frost glinting like tiny stars in the pale light, the wind carrying the scent of damp earth and hay. Eli watched the horse, noting the slow relaxation of muscles, the softening of the eyes, the subtle lowering of the head, as if to test the warmth of the connection. He allowed himself to imagine a life where this bond could deepen, where trust could grow, where both of them could step forward from the shadow of their own hardships. And as the horse finally took a step closer, letting his hand rest fully along its neck, Eli knew that the morning had shifted in ways neither of them could yet measure. The spark of recognition, of mutual need and shared vulnerability had been struck. It would not carry them across all the valleys of fear and past wounds, but it had begun. And in that beginning, there was a quiet power, the kind that arrives not with force, but with patience, courage, and the willingness to remain present when the world has offered little else. The sun climbed higher, catching frost along the edges of the barn, illuminating the valley in pale gold. Dust stirred in shafts of light, lifting in delicate motes around them. Eli and the horse remained still together, not yet friends, not yet free of their scars, but connected in a way that hinted at transformation. The day awaited, full of challenge and discovery, but for this moment, there was acknowledgement, there was trust, and there was the quiet, unspoken promise that neither of them would face the world alone. Eli watched the horse as it moved slowly through the frostbitten pasture, each careful step pressing into the frozen earth, ears flicking at every sound. Its coat glistened faintly under the weak sun, yet the scars along its flanks were impossible to ignore, pale streaks against dark matted hair. Something about the injuries, the way the animal flinched at sudden sounds, suggested more than mere neglect. He had seen horses shy before, but this one carried the weight of history in every muscle, every cautious glance. Eli's heart tightened. There was more to this creature's story than he had first imagined. He returned to the barn, boots crunching against the frost, determined to understand. The small, faded office tucked into the corner offered little more than dust and old ledgers. But Eli began rifling through drawers, opening folders long abandoned. Each piece of paper told fragments, veterinary bills, medical notes, photographs of the horse in better days, and one name that repeated across the margins of faded documents. A local racing farm, a place known in town for winning trophies, but whispered about in hushed tones for the ruthless treatment of its animals. Eli leaned over the desk, fingertips brushing the papers as though he could summon the memories embedded in them. The more he read, the heavier the truth settled on his chest. This horse had once been prized, trained for speed and endurance, celebrated for its strength and beauty. But injuries, small at first, then severe, had made it worthless in the eyes of those who valued only profit. The mare that had once been a companion to a child now lay abandoned, left to fend for itself in a valley that offered survival but no comfort. Eli felt a swell of anger, bitter and quiet, not aimed at the animal, but at the cruelty that had cast it aside. He gathered the documents carefully and stepped outside, letting the wind carry the weight of knowledge across the field. The horse had wandered to a small rise, ears twitching, tail flicking as if aware of the disturbance in his energy. When he approached, it did not shy away, but watched him with that same wary intelligence. Eli knelt in the frost, placing a hand against the rough wood of the fence, letting his presence be steady and calm. "I see now," he murmured, almost to himself. "They didn't care, but I do." The valley felt colder, emptier, yet it also held a strange clarity. He realized that saving the horse would require more than patience. It would demand confrontation. The farm, the owners, the system that had deemed life expendable in pursuit of gain. These were obstacles that could not be ignored. And yet, he understood that true change could not come through anger or force, only through persistence, empathy, and unflinching resolve. Eli's thoughts were interrupted by movement along the edge of the field. A neighbor, a man who had worked at the racing farm in years past, appeared hesitantly from the line of trees. His clothes were worn, hands scarred by labor, eyes wary of both Eli and the horse. "You shouldn't waste your time," the man said softly, voice carrying the weight of memory. "That horse, it's been through more than most of us can bear. They left it for a reason." Eli listened without judgment, noting the way the man's gaze flicked to the horse's scars, the twitch of muscles that had learned vigilance long before trust. He nodded slowly, letting the words settle. "I know it's hard," he said, "but maybe it's not about why they left it. Maybe it's about what we do now." The neighbor shifted uneasily, but Eli saw a flicker of understanding pass between them. Sometimes, acknowledgement was the first step toward change, even when the past remained unalterable. Later, Eli ventured closer to the horse, letting his hand rest along the curve of its neck. The animal flinched at the touch of frost on his sleeve, then remained, allowing the connection to deepen. He felt the tension in its body, the residual fear that had been trained into it by hands more interested in profit than care. And he understood, in a way that was both humbling and galvanizing, that the process of healing would be slow, requiring every ounce of patience and attentiveness he could muster. Days passed in this rhythm. Observation, gentle touch, the slow offering of oats, the careful monitoring of movement. Each step forward revealed another layer of the horse's story. Eli noticed how it reacted to the wind, to the shadows cast by clouds drifting across the valley, to sounds from the distant hills. Its flinches were measured, deliberate, a language born of fear and endurance. He began cataloging the patterns, noting each trigger, each moment of trust, each tentative acceptance of his presence. Through this careful study, Eli also discovered more about the farm's indifference. A letter tucked behind the ledgers revealed that the owners had been warned of mistreatment, yet no action had been taken. The horse was just one in a line of animals deemed expendable, a casualty of greed disguised as sport. Eli folded the letter carefully, feeling a swell of purpose tempered by quiet sorrow. This was no longer about simple rescue. It was about bearing witness, ensuring that neglect did not go unnoticed, that cruelty could not remain unchallenged. He began to understand that the horse's survival depended on more than food and shelter. It required advocacy, strategy, and endurance against forces far larger than the valley itself. He would need to gather evidence, document scars, trace the history, and confront the system with facts, not fury. Each discovery strengthened his resolve, creating a moral rhythm that pulsed as steadily as the frost-laden river that wound through the valley below. The horse, seemingly aware of his growing determination, began testing the boundaries of trust. It would approach the trough when Eli was near, pause in the sunlight that warmed the pasture, lower its head as if measuring whether this care was genuine. And each time, Eli responded with patience, understanding, and quiet consistency. The small victories accumulated, imperceptible at first, yet building a foundation that promised something extraordinary, a bridge between fear and safety, between neglect and redemption. By evening, the valley was bathed in muted gold, shadows stretching long across the frost-dusted ground. Eli knelt near the barn, tracing the outline of the horse's scars with a finger, imagining the hands that had inflicted them and the indifference that had allowed it. The air was still, heavy with expectation, the horse breathing gently beside him, steam curling from its nostrils. He realized that this moment, fragile and tense, held the weight of every choice he would soon have to make, whether to act, to confront, to save not just the horse, but the principle of care itself. Eli stood, boots crunching against frost, eyes meeting the horse's one more time. The sun lingered on the horizon, a pale promise that light could still reach through even the coldest of seasons. The valley seemed to lean in, silent, watching, holding its breath. He understood now that the struggle ahead would not be simple, and that trust, once earned, could be fragile and fleeting. Yet he also knew that some truths demanded persistence, that courage was measured not in spectacle, but in quiet, deliberate acts, and that every scar, on animal or human, carried a story waiting to be acknowledged. The horse moved closer, shoulders relaxing imperceptibly, eyes softening in ways that mirrored the slow unfreezing of Eli's own heart. In the distance, the outlines of the racing farm rose, subtle yet menacing, a reminder that the world beyond the valley was indifferent, often cruel. And yet, in the shared silence of man and animal, there was a sense that change was possible, that patience and courage could bend reality toward justice. The day had revealed the hidden truth, the cruelty that lingered beyond the frost, but it had also revealed the possibility of action, of advocacy, and of redemption. Eli exhaled slowly, letting the wind carry away the weight of the morning, and he whispered, not as a command but as a promise, "We'll face it together." The horse remained, ears flicking, muscles coiled yet calm, a mirror of his own tentative determination. The valley held its quiet counsel, frost glittering in the dying light, and in that stillness, Eli understood that the path ahead would be neither swift nor easy, but it was a path worth taking. The horse had survived cruelty, now it would survive compassion. And in that fragile alliance, both of them had found a reason to step forward into a world that had long demanded indifference. The wind had shifted that morning, carrying a chill that spoke of winter's persistence, but also of something quieter, the turning of a page, the moment when patience would meet consequence. Eli stood at the edge of the barn, boots pressing into the frost-hardened soil, watching the horse shift restlessly in the pale light. Its flanks had healed in small, almost imperceptible ways, muscles flexing beneath a coat that had begun to regain sheen, and yet the scars remained, a testament to what had come before. He reached out a hand and ran his fingers along the curve of its neck, feeling the tension that still lingered there. Soon, he murmured, not as a promise to the horse, but as a promise to himself. The racing farm loomed at the edge of the valley, buildings sharp against the horizon, the barn doors dark, the fences tall. Eli had gathered the papers, the photographs, the testimony of neighbors who remembered the cruelty too well to forget. Each detail carried weight, but the challenge was more than presenting proof. It was forcing those who had long ignored suffering to acknowledge it, to recognize that life discarded in pursuit of gain still demanded accountability. He felt the familiar ache in his back, the weariness that had accompanied him through frost and failure, but it had transformed into resolve. This was no longer about survival, it was about justice. He approached the farmhouse cautiously, the horse following at a careful distance, ears pricked, tail swishing in alert rhythm. The owner, a man whose reputation preceded him in whispers of intimidation and indifference, emerged onto the porch. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Eli, hands curling into fists, yet he made no move to confront. There was a tension in the air, a pause that stretched across the frost-silvered valley, carrying the weight of history and expectation. Eli spoke first, his voice calm but steady, carrying over the crunch of frost beneath his boots. "I've come to show you what your neglect has done." He held out the photographs, the veterinary notes, the letters. This horse, once prized, now discarded. Injured, abandoned, left to survive on nothing. And yet it has endured. The owner's jaw tightened, the first flicker of unease crossing his features. But he said nothing, as if the silence might shield him from accountability. The horse shifted, stepping closer to Eli, nostrils flaring, muscles coiled, yet still calm. Its presence was a quiet testament to resilience, a living argument that spoke louder than threats or denial. Eli's eyes met the owner's, unflinching, steady. "It is still alive because someone cared," he continued, because someone refused to look away. You cannot erase what has been done, but you can choose to acknowledge it, to act, to repair even a fraction of the harm. The owner's lips pressed into a thin line. He reached for the railing, fingers gripping the wood with a tension that mirrored the weight of truth pressing upon him. Eli could see the calculation behind the gaze, the resistance to shame, the instinct to protect reputation over life. And yet, in the faint glint of frost along the eaves, in the way the horse's ears swiveled to track every subtle movement, there was a quiet inevitability. Neglect cannot remain unchallenged forever. A neighbor stepped forward, hesitant, then resolute, offering corroboration. The horse had been injured under the owner's care, left without proper attention, abandoned when it no longer served his purposes. More neighbors joined, voices quiet but firm, a chorus of observation that pierced the veil of indifference. Eli held the horse close, steadying it with gentle hands, feeling the warmth of life beneath his touch, and let the witnesses speak. Each account, each piece of evidence, layered upon the next, building a case not in rhetoric, but in undeniable truth. The owner shifted, finally, his pride warring with recognition. He could argue, deny, offer excuses, but the weight of the evidence, the presence of the horse, and the moral certainty in Eli's posture left no room for evasion. Eli felt no triumph in this moment, only a quiet acknowledgement that justice, even slow and painstaking, had begun its course. He had not struck, had not shouted, had not demanded vengeance. He had simply borne witness, persisted in care, and allowed truth to unfold in its own time. With the witnesses in place, Eli led the horse gently to the barn, letting the creature move at its own pace, muscles relaxing under the warmth of sunlight and familiarity. The horse stepped through the threshold as if entering a sanctuary, the weight of the past pressing against the wooden walls but unable to define what lay ahead. Eli followed, hand steady, voice soft, offering reassurance in the form of presence rather than command. Each motion was deliberate, a choreography of trust that mirrored the patience and empathy he had cultivated over weeks of frost and quiet observation. Once inside, he began the slow work of tending to the horse's remaining injuries, brushing matted fur, cleaning cuts, offering feed in measured portions. The animal leaned into the care, eyes softening, breathing evening calm, as though the act of consistent attention had begun to repair not only body but spirit. Eli felt a tightening of his chest, a release of years of guilt and isolation, as if the act of caring had illuminated a path forward for both of them. The barn, once a repository of neglect, became a place of renewal, of purpose, of quiet triumph. Outside, the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the valley, painting frost in delicate golds and blues. The horse stood fully beside him now, muscles relaxed, ears attentive, eyes reflective. Eli reached out, resting a hand along the scarred flank, feeling the warmth beneath the surface, and realized that the moment had arrived that weeks of patience had prepared them for. Stillness, acknowledgement, mutual trust. The 3-second pause that had first sparked their connection now held a new resonance, a symbol of resilience, of transformation, of what could be built from quiet courage and persistence. The owner retreated, silent but aware that the day had shifted irrevocably. He could not undo the harm, nor fully reclaim the past, but Eli understood that victory was not measured in confrontation, only in the steadfast pursuit of what was right. The valley itself seemed to breathe with him, the frost glittering on grass, the wind carrying a soft promise of continuity, of growth, of possibility. Eli led the horse outside once more, stepping into the sun-drenched field, boots pressing softly in a thawing frost. The horse sniffed at the air, nostrils flaring, tail flicking in measured rhythm. It turned its head, dark eyes meeting Eli's with a quiet acknowledgement that transcended words. In that glance, he saw the reflection of his own journey. Patience tempered by adversity, courage born of quiet persistence, and the unspoken understanding that bonds forged in care could withstand the coldest seasons of fear and neglect. The valley was calm now, the pale gold of evening brushing over the hills, over the barn, over the narrow path they had traveled together. Eli exhaled slowly, letting the wind carry the weight of days spent in vigilance, and for the first time in years, felt a release that was neither loud nor dramatic, but profoundly complete. The horse stood beside him, no longer trembling, no longer wary, a living testament to resilience and the power of steadfast compassion. He knelt one last time, brushing a hand along its mane, and whispered, "We've made it this far, together." And in that moment, the valley held its quiet counsel, frost glinting like scattered stars, shadows stretching long across the field, and both man and horse understood that they had endured the trials of neglect, fear, and indifference, only to emerge in quiet triumph, scarred but whole, bonded by trust and the deliberate courage to do what was right. The horse took a step forward, ears flicking, muscles relaxed but alert. Eli followed, boots crunching softly on the earth, heart steady, mind clear. They moved together through the valley, toward the barn, toward the future neither could fully foresee, yet certain that what had been endured could be transformed into hope. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the valley in muted golden shadow, the stillness between them spoke louder than any words. Resilience had triumphed, compassion had endured, and the world, however indifferent, could still bend toward justice when met with quiet persistence. Eli looked out across the field one final time, the horse at his side, and allowed himself a moment of clarity. This was more than rescue. It was witness, advocacy, redemption. And in the gentle fading light, he understood a truth that would linger far beyond the frost, beyond the scars, beyond the valley itself. Some lives, broken and scarred, can still find their way in a wholeness when met with courage, patience, and the unwavering decision to act.